Today's EU stream is brought to you by nothing in particular. I think there were some issues with character select, and as far as I know, one of these Koma intended to play a different character today. But the mirror match is still a good place to get some warm-up done, especially if your styles are slightly different. Armored. This is our EU lounge, therefore you probably will have better connection to the players involved. If you are on the rim of the Atlantic Ocean somewhere, as usual, but particularly today, if you are somewhere in Europe and have a decent internet connection. Anyone you have a poor connection to will probably make way for the one you should have better connection to. As usual, the stream will go on for about an hour, so feel free to jump in. And I believe that we're now going to see some effort to change character. I have no recollection of how that's done, but that's okay because I don't plan to play any other characters really. So actually, let me pass so that this can continue. And so we welcome Mario. In general, this character type is called the puppet character. This game already, strictly speaking, has one such character, but it depends on how you perceive how the maids work when it's two of them. Strictly because a built-in double doesn't always count the same. It depends on how independently they can act and whether or not you have limited moves based on which form you're in, let's say. Whereas a quote-unquote puppet character almost always is the character you're controlling the entire time with extra stuff on the screen. The difficulty shown here, of course, is that the extra stuff on the screen is distracting. And it's usually good to get some practice in against characters like this, even when you understand nothing about them, even when you don't have a bot or think you might be able to deal with any of the complexity of whatever other players come up with to lock you down or cause you confusions. Simply because you have to get used to there is a thing on the screen that I'm not supposed to look at. The balanced choices of Melty Blood seem to be to put that a little higher in the difficulty than usual. It's not very easy to visually distinguish Mario from any given nun that he is relying on. I think there are definitely colors where that's not as difficult, but who would pick those? More seriously though, the higher level of defensive capacity in this game generally means that you will spend more time trying to figure out what the actual incoming attacks are. Normally against this style of character, your best bet is to learn one way that you can be opened up while blocking that will actually do damage to you, and figure out how you want to deal with that. And other than that, just block for a really long time. Sometimes you have to learn some left-right mix-ups depending on the game. Occasionally even high-low ones, but if your defense is good enough, it doesn't really matter that much, and you can often get out of the situation depending on your own character's invincible moves. Melty Blood so far hasn't shown itself to be terribly different. In fact, having more options such as shield makes it even harder to be concerned about this. A basic understanding of what you can hit and the ability to keep your eye on the actual target, let's say, makes it a little bit easier overall. You already see the adaptation of our coma being basically, okay, I'm just going to focus on keeping you in the space that I understand how to hit. This is usually good because this character type, while definitely dangerous in a lot of ways, tends to not be designed for playing strong neutral using their own physical skill and tools. They can definitely have a lot of options for the purpose, but they tend to be very singular. And as shown there, part of the balance of this game is that if one of the sisters is deployed to finish a combo, it seems that most of the time those combos result in them being far away. But this game doesn't have one of the usual problems that comes up. When you're facing off against this sort of character and they have the ability to push you away with their attacks, you often end up just having to put up with this for long periods because there's no way to get close enough. But between the rapid screen crossing speed of many moves and even just attacks out of run in Melty Blood, combined with the fact that you do have the option from your from your shield to hit B and basically teleport behind your opponent vanish style, you spend a lot less time worried about the fact that you can be attacked from far away without your opponent actually approaching you. Honestly, it's just kind of a really weird projectile. Similarly, because just playing neutral doesn't tend to lead to lots of damage, and so far I haven't seen any signs that this is easily beaten. There might be some high level stuff later, but there seems to be a lot more work involved in getting that right. But again, normally this type of character has what you just saw, a way to set up pressure after those interactions, and you can often just block that too. Oh no, it's noon. I'm gonna die. There's clouds in the background. Aren't even gonna be any help, are they? This matchup has been hard recently. My opponent has worked out basically all of their spacings to make my life hard. And I've had to beat it with just quick standing C, and in certain cases crouching C. But of course this has inspired me to do much more work based on those options. So nothing at least lost there as a whole. That said, when I say work on, I don't mean that I actually practiced this game at any point. When you've played fighting games for long enough though, you're not always actually doing the practice by playing the game. You're just thinking about specific things within it. Some top players can even get away with not doing any of this and just literally simulating it in their heads. I got too close there. So yes, I actually spent quite a lot of time simulating recently that I needed to do specific things. I forgot that no matter how many hits I have, Koma just armors through all of it and ignores me. This battle of spacing is going to be a long one, therefore. I was not sure I was going to make that in time. Playing this game well takes quite a lot of practice simply because of the number of options available. The characters are not terribly strong without their moon attacks, but the moon moves and similar were not necessarily made super strong in themselves, for a good reason. You don't generally want one-button specials, even in modern games, to be the way that most people interact with their opponents. It'll lead to some sorts of irritation, let's say. You can't see it by messing with spacing a whole lot right now. This moment though, where I have no meter of any other kind, is exactly the moment where this sort of move becomes more important. Usually they're at least faster, and that can help a lot. There are also other helpful properties, aside from the cancels. I was somehow expecting to cross up there and I don't know why. What game was I playing where that would be a cross up? Fundamentals will carry you fairly far in this game, but only if you expect and understand very specific things about it. It's easier to see it on our NA streams when more people join, but here's a B ranked, I have no idea what character that is from here. Looks like Akiha? No. That's a maid. Got it. So once we get to them and they start doing the pummeling, we'll get to discuss more about what sorts of things are important for how you think about the game, and not so much how you physically play it, which makes it a relatively easier game to pay attention to. But as we mentioned before, a lot of accuracy, tracking, and similar things come up here. I think if I had executed that right, it would have worked. Armored. This is basically what I'm talking about. It's harder to keep track of Mario, and when you have characters who have a lot of moves that require you to be very fast, he can keep you in bad situations for much longer. But that's really on you for either overcommitting or trying to challenge at times when you shouldn't. To put that in a different perspective then, I keep on trying to hit, and my opponent is able to use Moon Meter to prevent those hits from working. But the answer would be to block them, because my opponent will eventually run out of Moon Meter if I keep on blocking correctly. And because Mario himself is not the most accurate character, he spends a lot of time trying to make sure that his spacing is right. And it's entirely possible for the player to mess their own spacing up simply because there's so much happening on the screen. You do get some benefits of just playing a faster character for long enough. This in turn will force a lot of players to use their quickest attacks. But their quickest attacks are usually not that helpful. It's a general thing in this game that your quickest attacks do the functionally least damage. And, worse yet, they changed the ratings of further combos moves so that you get even less damage. Being able to explicitly understand that your character is aiming to get their damage through a big hit in neutral, for example, versus a reset, or armoring through a bad situation, is what separates characters in these games' game plan from each other. Anyone can just mash 2A and hope that their good combo works. But a lot of the time it's to your advantage to aim for the biggest hit you know will land. It isn't about, I have hit you at all, this is starting a thing. I am going for damage because that's the correct thing to aim for here. This can make the character relatively harder to play though, because you have to spend so much time with less powerful mid-range moves to begin with, and still tracking your spacing on top of all of that. Of course, that's the weakness. If you are good at the mid-range, you don't really care about this, because once you've got the knockdown, your opponent has to decide whether or not they're even getting out. He does suffer somewhat, I think, against characters with good lows, but I'm not really sure why this is. I'm not sure if he needs to backdash more. One of the things that comes up fairly often with characters like this is that their second self, their puppet form, doesn't actually move completely in sync with them. And that means that if they backdash, the character, even if that character was drifting behind them because they were otherwise advancing, that won't necessarily move the character. They will backdash behind the character but not necessarily change anything else. This is Kwaku's sword, which means I can't use most of my charged moves. She will generally beat them or punish them. I do have to deal with some stuff airborne, and I have to shield really well. You can definitely see it shown off here because this is exactly the sort of character I was thinking about. She spends a lot of time making sure she lands her biggest hit, her best hit. This is compounded, thankfully, by the fact that she is usually far enough away and able to maintain the spacing where she can do that. But once she's landed the smaller hits, you don't necessarily get that much out of it. Fortunately, lots of range always helps. A lot of meter is going to be used on that because there's basically no other answer and it's the best way to get out of the move altogether. However, if you mistime it, you're still going to die. Especially if your character has a quote-unquote poor uppercut. For Arcwade, your best options are to build meter very fast and try to use it very heavily. Not necessarily to extend your combos, but to simply get through more spaces on screen before she can hit you. You can also force whiff punishes at relatively longer ranges, but since her moves are so fast, she can literally react to any flash whatsoever, and you have to be really creative about it, therefore. That was actually supposed to be a throw. My bad. Otherwise, you're fighting similar to Dalsim. Get close to your opponent and block, so that they are slightly closer than they want to normally be relative to the attacks they have available. Anything else will lead to that happening. One good benefit though is that she isn't terribly great at punishing, let's call it healing. Technically, this is another part where building up your meter higher is more beneficial to you. So I've made the mistake, basically, of having this become too much in that regard altogether. I have too much meter now. I can't use it the way I should. So I use up 3 of it, you know, just as a bet, more or less. But nope. Why did I forget that was a grab? I always forget that's a grab. Honestly, I should have jumped out of it even if it wasn't a grab, because it was probably perfectly done at max range and therefore my punish would have been difficult anyway. But here we are. If you're used to fighting long-range characters in games like Street Fighter, then just do what you do against them. It's usually a matter of getting outside of their attack range altogether, jumping toward them at the point where their anti-air will whiff, and then forcing them to use a different move. They can usually use a different anti-air, but it more so just tends to air reset you and cause you some other difficulty that you probably are much better suited to dealing with. Coma doesn't really have to worry about this as much because Coma can just use certain moon moves and armor to tank straight through her stuff. So Coma can outright ignore a large part of her main game plan by just having full 2-2C armor up. Making actually is sort of similar. Your goal is often to just have so much armor, so much meter usage constantly ongoing, that you don't care about what's happening. If your meter is getting too high in this matchup, either you're completely dominating, or you probably aren't making judgments quickly enough. But you can't afford to do that sort of thing against this level of enemy. The ability to just ignore a lot of her strategy means that she spends a lot more time in the air because it is how she can best avoid being caught by Coma. But you can 2-2C out of nearly everything. and just ignore this character's setups. Now, because this changes the match instantly, as long as you have any meter, she's going to have to deal with that. Also probably forgot it was a grab. But that sort of thing is the sort of thing you just shrug off because it's your opponent taking advantage of your lack of knowledge, not your lack of skill. And if your aim is to get better, it's just like fighting a boss that has the move that you've never seen them do. Using your moon meter correctly, therefore, is a matter of understanding, do I have enough ways out of this to solve my problem? This matchup isn't actually that much worse for Kohaku, but the thing she's trying to do in it is usually different. She's normally trying to like be ambiguous by jumping over Koma's head in a specific way. Now, because this does time out relatively quickly, she can just wait through it, but that gives Koma also free positioning. And free positioning is practically a win condition in this matchup. So, again, activating the armor is what makes you unable to just not care about what's going on. It's not explicitly that you have to armor through things, and it's important to think about that because realizing I'm safe as long as I have basically any armor, my opponent must change their mindset, their playstyle, everything about what they want to do normally has changed because I have used one move. And yes, just punch through everything. One of her better options is often to dash up and throw, actually, but getting into that position is really hard. There we go. She can also be ready to throw at better situations, but there we go. Since Koma can then use the moon meter to approach, and she's not terribly strong against this character once that sort of thing has happened. Yep, there we go. Another perfect decision. So, oh, you're up in the air? I could try to hit you, or I could just put up my armor again. But there, we finally saw the adaptation. I'm going to get over your head and resolve my problem by being out of your strike range altogether. There isn't necessarily an answer to this from the Koma side. If there was, then I would really go ahead and call this matchup terrible for Kohaku. But Koma doesn't really need to answer it necessarily either. I forgot you can shield that way. The rest is just like understanding your specific ranges. Using up the whole thing, huh? Makes sense. Even in that scenario, I'm not sure it was a bad idea to just armor up. Koma additionally has other armored moves that make her life hard. So yeah, there's that too. And kaboom. It is extremely beneficial that that 2-2C power armor covers so much space when it's a strike. Yep, overhead. I don't really have a specific way to suggest that Koma deal with this, because you actually have to be fully aware of it and get the jump, sometimes jump throw, sometimes other things. But you got to see the entire thing basically play out. They shifted into the method that actually defeats the character without having to deal with the armor, and things went, I'd say, somewhat better. Mario similarly has armored options, but does not have the same type of armored options to deal with the same types of problems. Once down, Mario's life is quite hard. The goal would therefore be, don't be down. And Mario can usually achieve this by fighting from very far away, and when not far away, making sure that he's airborne. The way that the character interacts with other stuff that's going on, plus the ability to just send out characters that can land a hit without putting Mario into her range, effectively solves the problem. This forces her to play somewhat aggressively, but that's not so bad, because again, if you're not really expecting to take a ton of damage from Mario, then you don't care as much, quite simply. Therefore, being more aggressive is just a straight up better idea, particularly with throw setups and similar. And because Mario's even EX moves don't really lead to good stuff in that way, you're more so watching his moon meter to see if he has enough moon meter to do a bunch of things at mid-range. Jump too early, but still, we're getting there. Honestly, similarly, you can sometimes just accept it, just take the throw. There are a lot of situations for these characters where you just take the throw. But what we have now is a situation that's gotten worse because Mario has no moon meter to use. And there's just no quick way to get that back, so the situation is just, I wouldn't call it unwinnable, but probably it should have been more toward going for healing, because again, she's not terribly good at stopping healing when she's far away. She has definitely hits that do it, but most people, your problem is that they'll hit you and keep on hitting you the entire time and chunk away all of the healing you're actually doing. Whereas, if Kohaku has retreated, you generally don't have this problem. But now there's moon meter again, so there's some options. But this moment, for example, this is a healing moment, usually, because she's not going to do much about it. Also, so many of her approaches put her in a bad position relative to you hitting the healing, that she'll get blasted away from you, and basically be unable to recover in time to actually harm you, simply because she's getting knocked out of the air and is usually in the middle of a move. The move itself is keeping her safe from many of your counterattacks, particularly if you don't have a character that attacks too high into the air. But with other characters, you're worried about being baited on the healing or other things, whereas with Kohaku, you're just trying to get your timing right so you can activate it while she's over your head or something. That level of freedom means you can spend a lot of time regaining health in this matchup if you understand where the opponent's flow is. You do have to worry about the cactus because it doesn't help you against the cactus. It is in fact why our bot for this character, or rather one of the other bots we were developing that happens to work for this character, is based almost entirely on teaching you how do I deal with that cactus. My problem is I don't necessarily understand enough about Mario's EX moves to suggest what to use the meter for otherwise. Because it's again the same situation. You don't really want to be spending too much time with high meter for no reason. Because, as you can see, if you've gotten up to 3, even if you took damage during it, chances are that you will still have that set up long before. But yeah, you can just think of this as a tanking situation. Mario tanks this character. Koma tanks this character. Arcway, she can attack more directions, so she doesn't have to try that hard to tank, but has to be very accurate overall. You could say she uses the movement. But with enough meter here, right, this moment was another probably I should have healed instead. In fact, you can spend a lot of time with your mind focused entirely on your meter because this is a tanking situation. If you play MMOs, you could change your entire mindset to that. She's going to hit you. She's going to frustrate you doing so. And you have to think entirely in those terms. Looks like they're off. Therefore, we're back to spacing. I was so not prepared for that move to actually hit. I'm informed that that move from before is not actually a grab. I'm not sure I believe this entirely. Because if something is dealt with only by one specific defense, then it's functionally a grab. Like if you does that mean it's technically an overhead? I'll look into this later. But I just don't want to be giving any false information. That said, you can still treat it as a grab in the sense that you should jump. Now I have the information. I'm told it will break low and high guard, but it is mid-shieldable. That, to me, doesn't make it not a grab, it makes it a mid-shieldable grab. But I suppose technically it does count as a hit, otherwise you wouldn't be able to shield it at all. Max range. I did that instead of the moon version. I explicitly said to myself I must use more moon meter. Oh, I was out of moon meter. Well, even though our Kohaku is gone, I'm still able to demonstrate a lot of the things I'm talking about. Arcwade as a character is great for me because she has almost complete control of where she is on the screen at any time. I think I even have like retreat options in the air that I just never use. Because why would I go backward? But I'm sure I can like air bat dash or something, right? Yeah, I can. But it is a common trope with my characters. If I don't want to be in the air anymore, then I'm not. If I do want to be in the air a lot, then I am. I dashed into that with a plan and still missed it. This is particularly strong relative to her throw game because other people don't have to think about how quickly you can get to the ground and then therefore throw. Even her uppercut, if you're using the correct one, will have the same reaction because you can just come back out of it as quickly as you want. Which then, again, opens up a very, very quick change from I must defend by blocking to I must defend by moving. I can't necessarily say that I think of this character as Rushdown because I've seen people try to play her as Rushdown and I feel as if it doesn't actually work all that well. She's much more similar to Cammy in that regard, having a lot of quick options that you must pay a lot of attention to, so she can cut through a lot more things. But sticking to your opponent and pressuring them, or even trying to get to them quickly, seems less effective. Although I haven't watched high-level footage of this game in a while. The last time I watched was like 2 months ago, watching Xiao Hai and his gang do whatever. Perfectly corner guarded. This is explicitly one of the things you see me focus on for exactly that reason. This game has a lot of options for characters like Arcade after this to go for the equivalent of resets instead of trying to get more damage out of the actual attack. Hence this setup. Of course, a lot of this does require you to understand your opponent's psychology and, more importantly, to be willing to use the health. But it also means that if you are not necessarily that confident, you have some other better options. Understanding their recovery timing, or had I not been wanting to do that, then I would have gone the other way and specifically just went for healing myself if I had less meter. Similarly there, choosing to fall slower because I know that my opponent, while they do have good, at least decent attacks over their head, I feel like Mario's lacking that somewhat compared to other characters. And because of the way Arcade does things, if she does like down C in the air, she's hard to grab. So you can see why you might not want to go at this character head on. What you do not want to do is what I just did. Don't just hit at Mario, block, and then expect to get away, because he has more control than you would expect from a lot of characters in this situation, and he has more ways of striking you quickly than this type of character normally has. In fact, you similarly have to spend a lot of time thinking about, you got hit there, and so did I, but that's okay, for whatever reason. Oh, I didn't have the meter for that. This game's damage type and the way the progression works, plus the healing, means that you can use a tactic that hasn't been seen that often in fighting games recently. You can aim to win a match purely by taking less damage in interactions than your opponent does, which is a slightly weird approach to take because it goes against most of the principles that other slower games will teach you. Most of those games are simply don't get hit. Understand how to outmaneuver your opponents so that you don't get hit, because when you do get hit, most of the time you are going to take a lot of damage. And games with long combos like this one normally imply that is definitely going to be the case, unless your chosen starter was really bad. But the problem with Melty Blood is that the chosen starter being really bad is really common. So, as an example, spending too much time trying to make sure that Mario doesn't hit me at all is fruitless at my level of understanding of that matchup. What I would need to do is make sure that when Mario does hit me, it's just like tapping 5A or 2A, and anything after that is not really damaging. Mistimed, but didn't get hurt that much for it. Claws cover a lot of space. While this tree was quite close to perfect in that regard, we got some good warm-up, someone jumping in to give me something useful to talk about for a couple of matches, and then close out standardly. I deserve that. I deserve that less, but it still deserved that too. This sort of game is really hard if you haven't trained in the fighting game act of being able to see very quickly. So don't feel too bad if you are trying to learn how to play it, but can't keep up with what's happening at first. We do need to develop some bots that will train people to see faster if this is the only game they care about. But the problem with bots like that is they're always so hard to input that it's rougher. On the other hand, we do start to treat them as advanced bots sometimes simply because not being able to see quickly enough is not necessarily a sign that you don't know how to play the game. It's just that you don't have the level of recognition required to do specific things in the game. I'm converting Moon Meter into regular meter here. It's not going well. Moon moves do give more meter than a lot of other things you could do, but this seems to be tuned by character in my experience, and therefore my general reaction is this doesn't seem to work well on Arquid, and I'm not sure why. But it could simply be the playstyle. Hitting more, doing longer combos is important. you can build up more meter simply because you are able to keep your combo going for longer. But there's no downside to your opponent to that other than that you have more meter. Which is a relatively fair way to design things. The better you get at the game, the more power you have, but you still have to know how to use that power. Similarly, other people have to deal with nothing in particular. They got hit, but because of the long combo being prorated out fairly early, they don't actually benefit, or rather you don't benefit from beating them up for a longer time, other than that there's meter involved. Put myself right in range of that kick. Now, this is basically our Mario players' first serious set of matches with this character, I think. So you're definitely not going to see any of the weirder conversions available. Specifically, being able to hit and recognize what the hit is, go into a longer, more complex combo from nearly any hit. I haven't seen much footage that indicates that the character does this well, which means it would take even longer to train it. But I'm doubting he's terrible at it. You're actually seeing one of his other main actual problems show up here. Part of it is psychological in that when you're playing this style of character, you don't usually expect your opponent to try to get close to you in the same way that I will often do. But the other problem is that when you do defend that space, there tends to be no good way to keep on doing it. Cut through. But yes, you can spend some time, since this is going to be this type of match anyway, just watch the damages. Neither of these characters is going to do much damage in our hands, at least. But the way that Mario does damage means that I have a lot more freedom. And that brings us back to what we were talking about before. In a situation with Kohaku, I wouldn't have been taking all those hits for all that long. I dropped it. Therefore, the regeneration time would have actually made a difference. Now I've had years of playing these games fighting against this style of character. I don't even see the sister at this point. This might actually be a bad thing later, because if I have to face a situation where I have to see them, it's going to matter. But yeah, I don't, that character has been phased out of my mind altogether. So technically, it is harder on my opponent who now must track their own character with someone else on the screen, where I have basically zoned them out and I'm not seeing them. The evil J has appeared. Right at the end of stream too. Hisui time! The general methodology I suggest for Hisui on nearly any character is get the knockdown and pressure a lot. This is technically true for Kahaku also, but it's much harder to do, so it doesn't matter. You don't have to defend yourself in mid-neutral as much, but she does have really good push-out block strings, similar to how, if you're a Street Fighter player, you have to deal with Nakali's stuff. Expect that level of, oh no, stuff is happening. She also has, similar to Arcwade, a lot of control over when she's in particular positions. So whereas normally I play this fairly straight, let's say, I don't spend a lot of time trying to get close to people on knockdowns, this is the character where I do that. And you can watch and see what type of risks, what outcomes tend to happen with it. You can interrupt a lot of her stuff and you can be ready with whiff punishes on a lot of it as well. But a lot of that involves getting out of her range to begin with. That, for example, can be done, but the timing is very difficult. It is a similar situation where you do need to keep a lot of meter quote-unquote on hand because of the way the character works. And similarly, if she's far enough out, the same sort of thing will happen where you get a lot of chance to regenerate. That's my secret, I always have a dangerous aura. I just cover it with cuteness so you don't notice. I think I need charge B more in this matchup because of that spacing difference. There we go. Right, because it takes me forward to where I want to be, but where my opponent doesn't necessarily get to hit me. That was just me dropping block. If you have a good charged move, you can use that to control space in neutral fairly well. The good thing about this character that solves the problem is that she does a lot of damage. Whenever you mess it up, the thing she started with is definitely not an attack that you will be able to just go, well, I'll just ignore this now. I got tapped. You didn't get tapped, you got hit with a chair. See? Messed it up. And that's like a quarter of my health or more gone now. As well as corner carry basically to the other side of the screen. Nope, half. Once you are in a setup, your situation is even worse. And her punish is again to hit you with the chair, so you die. This is also why you pressure this character. Her good damage is almost entirely locked behind that sort of thing. So, being right up in her face and challenging her doesn't necessarily mean you're in danger. If you do get hit, she can absolutely do those moves in combos, but because they are what one calls chunky moves, it's a really weird situation where because the move normally does a lot of damage and you rely on it, because the reduction in damage is based on percentages, a lot of it is lost when it's done off of a combo that had a poor starter. But it seems that they're out, actually. And that technically means we are now at the end of this stream. Since I guess that person headed out, we're probably not necessarily going to be playing more, but you could jump in quickly and see if you want to have a match or two before we do close up for the day. You can expect to see more Melty Blood later at the NA timing if you are interested in that sort of thing. That would be at 7:30 Eastern, and we will tweet out our intention to stream, or usually if you don't see any tweet by 7:30 Eastern, it means we're not streaming. You can find that on our Twitter @2_MK_FGC, and all of our bots for various games, including the minor ones that we have for this one, can be found at 2-mk.org. We will be having no Wednesday night in Birth stream tomorrow due to logistics, but we will still have a reduced Feeling Thursday King of Fighters stream. Weekend stuff is unknown because it's Combo Breaker weekend. So, you can join us next week for Mishmashing Battle Lounge in Street Fighter V on Monday, and bat around to another Tuesday melt next Tuesday. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training, and good night, everyone.